Hey guys, Dusty back here with Blind-Droid Tech. And I know it's been a while. I do apologize. I just started training with a new job, so I'm still getting settled in there, and I'm trying to, I got a lot of these accessibility apps out pretty quick, and now I'm kind of running out of apps to show off, so I'm trying to find some worthwhile apps to show you guys. So in the meantime, I'm gonna do blog number 2, or vlog, or video blog, whatever you want to call it, number 2. And in this blog or video blog, we're going to be talking about the different frequencies or airwaves, or commonly referred to spectrum, that each of these 4 wireless carriers have, because there's a lot of confusion. I know, especially for myself, there's a lot of confusion on what phones support what networks, because a lot of Verizon branded phones, even if you get them unlocked, they are, especially Verizon and Sprint, because those two are CDMA networks. And T-Mobile and AT&T are GSM, which is the global standard. You might see some CDMA networks throughout the world, but it's a lot more common to see GSM, and the US is more of the outlier, having CDMA. Now, I know Verizon Wireless is moving to an all LTE network. Actually, they're claiming that, I believe, by the end of this year or by the end of next year, they will be an all LTE network, no more CDMA, which is a little better, because LTE, believe it or not, LTE is a completely different network protocol. CDMA and GSM have different standards and the way they operate, such as CDMA, it's more restrictive. CDMA, generally, you cannot talk on the phone and surf the web at the same time. GSM, for the most part, you can stream or surf the web and talk on the phone at the same time. LTE, and especially voice over LTE with Verizon and Sprint, is their way to combat that, because AT&T and T-Mobile, as far as I know, have always been able to surf. You've always been able to talk on the phone and surf at the same time. I know back when I had AT&T back in high school, so back in the early 2000s, AT&T was the only carrier that I was able to get that I could surf the web and talk on the phone at the same time. LTE, and especially voice over LTE or VoLTE, Volt, that's what they're aiming to fix with that. And supposedly you get a lot higher quality sound, if you do Wi-Fi calling on your phone. Voice over LTE is supposed to be the same type of thing, as long as you get good enough coverage. Now, I've got a mixed bag when it comes to this, because on one hand, I like voice over LTE because it is nice and crystal clear. The problem I have with it, especially with Sprint and T-Mobile, and even AT&T. AT&T is getting a lot better, and I'll go into more of that later on. But Sprint and T-Mobile still have a lot of 3G coverage, and when you're on voice over LTE, obviously you have to be on 4G LTE. And if you drop down to 3G, that voice over LTE call is automatically going to drop. So that's the problem with that. As far as Sprint's concerned, they don't have true voice over LTE. They have Calling Plus, which uses a couple different technologies to try and get that higher quality voice. But again, if you move to a lower coverage area while you're on the phone, you're automatically going to drop that call as well. T-Mobile and Sprint are getting better, but AT&T and T-Mobile, or AT&T and Verizon really. Sorry, guys, got a tickle in my throat. AT&T and Verizon really do have the most complete voice over LTE ready network. And a lot of that is due to the spectrum that they have. And that's what I'm going to get into here, because a lot of people just say, oh, T-Mobile sucks, their coverage sucks. And honestly, I used to think the same thing of AT&T, because like I said, I had AT&T back pre-smartphone days. So I had the Nokia flip phone, which, was a semi-smartphone. I had the Motorola Razors, I had the shitty, $50, $60, smart, flip phones. I had all that. But, AT&T and Verizon was the first one into the smartphone race, so they really got the LTE race, and they were able to, stockpile a bunch of spectrum and get, the airwaves up, and that's why they've got the most dense coverage, T-Mobile and Verizon, believe it or not, started just about at the same time. T-Mobile itself was actually founded in 1999, and Verizon Wireless was started in 2000, and as a wireless carrier. And Sprint and AT&T were really the longest running. Sprint, I believe, was back in the 80s. Maybe early 90s, and AT&T used to be, Singular Wireless back then, and then AT&T bought them out, late 90s or early 2000s, so, Verizon and T-Mobile were actually the newest to the race, and AT&T just bought Singular Wireless and, started going from there. And then Sprint really was the longest running as an actual wireless provider. So, and look it up if you want. I actually did the same thing. I Googled when AT&T, when Verizon, when T-Mobile, when Sprint, when they all started, when the wireless carriers themselves were founded. And I was actually stunned. I mean, I knew Sprint was there forever, and that's why I'm kind of upset that Sprint is so far behind, because they've had the network the longest, which also means that they have the most equipment that they need to upgrade. They have the old network lines that they had to rip out and put fiber down. And when T-Mobile and Verizon started, I doubt Verizon was using, I don't think fiber optics was actually alive back then, but T-Mobile and Verizon were the newest to the scene, so they were able to lay some of the newer, network lines down and all that. So, and even Verizon's network is still considered old, because they had a lot of CDMA crap that they had to tear out for LTE and all that. So, I could go on for hours about this, but, key story here is, all these companies started out at a different time. They all had different dreams of what their wireless network would be like, and, that's why you really got to take it for what it's worth. And another thing, there are different, what they call blocks of spectrum. Like there's block A, block B, block C, block D, block E, and block F for certain frequencies. And again, you're going to see that here in just a minute. But that's really where these carriers differ. Like, for instance, Verizon uses LTE band 13 or 700 megahertz block C, as in Charlie, and AT&T back in, what was it, 2015, they started buying a lot of 700 megahertz spectrum as well for their low band coverage, and that was block B as in Bravo and block C as in Charlie. And then T-Mobile, I think I'll have to check, when I show you what all these different bands that these carriers have. They have like block A and block A only on 700 megahertz. And that's why all these companies have different licenses for different spectrum in different areas. So that's why it's kind of hard to say T-Mobile sucks and AT&T and Verizon are better, because there are different blocks of spectrum that are available in different areas. Like, since AT&T bought the 700 megahertz spectrum before T-Mobile did, they probably got more 700 megahertz coverage, across the country, because 700 megahertz is AT&T's base for their LTE network now. 700 is their main band, and then they use 1900 and 1700, 2100 megahertz as like capacity. There's even some areas where I guess they've got, I don't know what band number it is, but they've got 2300 or 2.3 gigahertz, and that's just considered for capacity. So I'll link to one of the websites that I found all this from, Phone Arena here. They've got a lot of info based on, spectrum in different areas and all that. So I'll leave the link in a comment down below for you guys to take a look at for yourself. But, long story short, there are different bands, different blocks of spectrum with different licenses that these carriers had to buy from radio broadcasting and TV broadcasting and all that. They get certain amounts of spectrum licenses based on the location and what's available. So, as far as I know, T-Mobile wasn't able to get any 700 megahertz in my area, because I'm pretty sure T-Mobile or AT&T and Verizon took up most, if not all, of the available 700 megahertz in my city or in my state. So that plays a big part in it too. And according to one of my other YouTuber guys, he emailed me and told me about what my city's getting, because a lot of these spectrum holdings are, map based, and being a blind person, I can't see these maps, so I rely on somebody with vision to kind of help me diffuse what's going on. But apparently, according to him, my city doesn't have any available 700 megahertz licenses, but I'm getting 40 megahertz of bandwidth of 600 megahertz spectrum. So, theoretically, T-Mobile would be able to do like 20 by 20 or 25 by 15 or 30 by 10, and that would really, really help boost the coverage and the building penetration, because in my area, the reason T-Mobile sucks in my city, they have great coverage outside. I've been all across the city kind of doing some testing, and they've got great coverage outdoors. I'm getting 4 to 5, maybe 3 to 5 bars just about everywhere I go around the city. But once I enter a big, or concrete or brick building or something like that, T-Mobile drops off. And even AT&T still has coverage. And that's because I found out AT&T and Verizon have most, if not all, of the 700 megahertz licenses for my area, so T-Mobile wasn't able to pick any up. So that's why they got the 40 megahertz of band 71 600 megahertz spectrum. So I know it's really technical. This video is going to be a little longer, so I apologize, but I want to try and clear this up because the higher the frequency, the more capacity it's going to be able to carry. But the less it's going to be able to penetrate through older and thicker buildings. So all that plays a part in how good a coverage you get and how good in-building reception you get and how good, how far into a building you can go and still have coverage. So with that being said, in my area, T-Mobile's primary band is band 2, 1900 megahertz, and then they also have band 4, 1700 and 2100 megahertz. And, so the high band is considered, as of right now, is 1900, 2100 megahertz, 2.5 gigahertz for Sprint. And then also you go clear up to AT&T and Verizon are trying to, kill each other, getting 28, 38, 40 gigahertz spectrum that they call millimeter waves for their 5G networks. Now, the problem I see with that and why Verizon is, winning there, because Verizon's putting up towers everywhere. All around the country, Verizon is putting tower after tower after tower and small cell after small cell after small cell. That's not, because Verizon's worried about their coverage. They've got great coverage because of their low band 700 megahertz. The thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to densify their network with enough small cells and enough towers that they can launch this 28 gigahertz, 38 gigahertz, 39, 40 gigahertz millimeter waves, because that stuff, think about how far your 2.5 gigahertz, or 2.4 gigahertz, I'm sorry. Think about how far your 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi travels. That's a higher band. Now imagine 10 times that. That's, still not quite as much, as high band as the 38, 40 gigahertz band. So that's only going to go a few hundred feet. So you've really got to have a small cell or a tower, every few hundred feet in order for that millimeter wave to be beneficial. So that's that. That's the 5G race. T-Mobile thinks that they're going to be able to do 600 megahertz as a backbone for their 5G network. Now, I think that's a little optimistic on their end. They're already talking about how now they've got a bunch of delays due to not enough people, putting up the technology and the hardware and the antennas for the 600 megahertz spectrum. So, and trust me, I'm still hoping that they get that out soon because my area needs low band. As of right now, T-Mobile only has high band spectrum in my area. So it's great for speeds. As you guys may or may not have seen in my earlier videos, on T-Mobile outdoors with 4 out of 5 and 5 out of 5 bars of LTE on band 2 and 4, I'm pushing almost 100 megabits per second. So their capacity is great. Their high band spectrum is great, but they need that low band to back up the building penetration. So that's a little bit on that. I mean, we haven't even really scratched the surface. So, you can do a lot of research. I can try and go into more detail, try and do more research, but it's a little more difficult because I have to find articles that don't have maps and all that crap, because I can't tell you what city has what bandwidth and how much spectrum, because a lot of it is map based. I have seen some articles that have the distribution of, spectrum in the area, but it's all map based, so I have to, I would have to see the map in order to see what spectrum lies where. So, without further ado, we're going to actually get into what bands these carriers have, and now I'm looking at Phone Arena right now because they've actually got a chart on theirs that actually goes into detail on it, and theirs is up to date. So they've got T-Mobile's newer Band 66, which is a multi-band frequency, so they combined a couple of the other bands, and it kind of, helps improve capacity and all that. T-Mobile's really trying to do whatever they can to lift the congestion with capacity. All the carriers really are, but T-Mobile's just trying to come up with new and different ways to save, capacity and to improve capacity and all that. So let's take a look at our chart here.
2, 4, 5, 8 carrier, cell, row 1, carrier, cell, row 1,
okay,
column 1,
so
grid,
here
7
we go.
rows, 3 columns.
So we've got carrier at the on the first column.
4 GLTE bands, cell, column 2.
4 GLTE bands.
Frequencies, cell, column 3.
Frequencies.
AT&T link added by Vic. Overview, button,
Oops.
out. Verizon wireless, cell, AT&T link added by Vic,
Okay,
link,
so
row 2.
here's AT&T. So they've got
2, 4, 5, 17, cell, column 2.
So they've got bands 2, 4, 5, and 17. Now I've seen 12 and 17. It really depends on your area. Just like band 5. Band 5 and band 12 are not available everywhere. It really depends on where they were able to get the licenses and get that spectrum up. And then if you go next,
1900, 1700 ABCDE, 700 BC, cell, column 3.
see, and you heard that it's 1900 and then 1700 ABCD.
2, 4, 1900, 1700 ABCDE, 700 BC, cell, column
Yeah.
3.
So it's 1900, and then they've got 1700 band A, B, C, D, and E, or block. So those A, B, C, D, E, those are blocks of spectrum. So AT&T's got the most blocks of 1700 spectrum. They've got A through E. And then band 5 is 850 megahertz. But again, that's not available everywhere.
Verizon wireless, cell, row 3,
And then
column
you go
1.
to Verizon.
2, 4, 13, cell, column 2.
They've got band 2, 4, and 13.
1900, 1700F, 700C, cell, column 3.
So you heard that AT&T has
2, 4, Verizon, 1900, 1700 ABCDE, 700 BC, cell, row 2, column 3. Headings and links, controls, character, words.
Okay, so
1900,
they got 1900,
1700, ABCDE, 700, BC, BC, characters, C, B, C,
okay.
words,
All right.
lines,
That was
default.
more for me, guys, not for you. But yeah, so AT&T has band 13 or 700 megahertz in the block B and block C. So that's the blocks that they have.
Verizon wireless, cell, 2, 4, 13, cell, column, 1900, 1700F, 700C, cell, column 3.
And then you heard that Verizon has band 1900 also, but they've got band for 1700, but they've only got licenses for block F. And then they've got
Headings and landmarks, links, control, characters, words, 1900, 1700, F, 700, C.
So they've got 1700F block, and they've got 700C block. So,
Lines. Default. T-Mobile. Cell. Row
and
4.
then
Column 1.
T-Mobile.
2, 4, 12, 66, 71 asterisk asterisk. Cell. Column 2.
So 66 is the one that I told you that I believe that's the multi-band frequency. I believe that uses band 2 and 4, but don't quote me on it. I honestly don't know as much about the band 66, but
1900, 1700 def, 700A, 600, cell, column 2, 1900, 1700,
Okay,
headings
so-
and landmarks, links, control, character, words, 1900,
so all these carriers pretty much have the high band 1900, and that's all for capacity.
1700,
Then they've got 1700.
def, characters, E, D, E, F,
So they've got band 1700 DEF.
words, lines, default, sprint, cell, 1900, 1700 def, 700A, 600, cell, row 4, column 3.
And then they've got block A of 700 megahertz. And like I said, so most of these bands, they have blocks of licenses or blocks of spectrum. So different carriers were able to get different blocks of different spectrum in different areas. Because as far as I know, they can't all have the same, block A of spectrum. Otherwise, they'll have a bunch of interference. I'm hearing reports that there's already interference, based on some of the networks, that they do have in common. So that I don't know as much. I haven't really looked it up. I just know that if you've got two of the same exact bands, two of the same exact blocks, but they're different carriers, they very well could interfere with each other. And then, and like I said, T-Mobile's band 700 is not available everywhere. That's not available in my area. I think it's because, like I said, Verizon and AT&T took up most of the 700. So you hear how T-Mobile's got band 2, 4, 12, 66, and 71. So they've got the most bands, theoretically, but they have the lowest amount of spectrum, because for the spectrum they've got different amounts of bandwidth, and the bandwidth is also measured in megahertz. So like in my city, they've got 20 megahertz of band 2, I believe that's 1900, then 15 megahertz of the band 4, and that's 1700, and I believe that's also 2100 that T-Mobile uses. So T-Mobile in my area has 19 and 2100 megahertz. So like I said, that's great for capacity, and the speeds are great, but it just doesn't go as far as like a band, 12 or 13 on Verizon or T-Mobile or AT&T. AT&T, like I said, I think some places AT&T has band 12 700. In other areas they have band 17 700 megahertz. So it all depends on where you live and what's available for purchase in your area. So a band 700 megahertz goes a lot farther and penetrates a lot easier, but it carries less capacity. So that's kind of the trade-off, and that's where I think these companies have to try and fine-tune how much megahertz of bandwidth go to which, band of LTE, and how much of the 600 megahertz do they want going to upload and down, or uplink and downlink and all that other technical jargon. But so those are those three, and then Sprint over here.
Sprint, cell, row 5, column 25, 26, 41, cell, column 2.
So they've got band 20, 25, 26, and 41. And band 25 is their primary band. That's what their entire network, mostly relies on. Calls, I believe it's like 1x RTT for calls, but for LTE, it's band 25 or 1900, and then band 26 is 850, and then band 41 is 2.5 gigahertz. That's the treasure trove of what spectrum Sprint has. So they've got an abundance of 41 band, but since it's 2.5 gigahertz or 2500 megahertz, they have to put up a lot more towers than what they've got in most areas. Now, I've been hearing and seeing different reports that they are putting up more towers and they are trying to put up more small cells. And there are some cities like Denver and other areas where Sprint is actually first in reliability and speed. So, like I said, it all depends on where you are, what's available, how much towers the carriers got. Like, AT&T has really done a number on their upgrading in my city. I remember there were quite a few dead zones, back when I had them. But that was back, like I said, 10 plus years ago. So obviously there's a lot of upgrading that they've probably done. They bought a lot of spectrum. They bought that 700 spectrum back in 2015. So that's probably who got most of what 700 megahertz Verizon didn't have in my area. AT&T quickly snatched it up. So plus AT&T bought out Cricket Wireless, and Cricket Wireless used to be pretty big in my area too. They had some coverage gaps as well. So whatever spectrum Cricket, had, AT&T bought that when they bought them out. And now Cricket Wireless is their MVNO partner, or mobile virtual network operator. So that's how they're able to run the same, on the same network as AT&T, because they are essentially AT&T and just a different brand. And they, as far as I know, AT&T lets Cricket run, the way they want. But they also do have other MVNO partners. Verizon and AT&T both are able to be used, I believe, with Net 10, Straight Talk, and Track Phone. And Straight Talk in my area, they gave me an option. I didn't choose them, but they gave me an option of AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile. And then Consumer Cellular also is an MVNO partner of AT&T. So there are different MVNOs for different carriers. Verizon's got Straight Talk, like I said. I believe Republic Wireless too. Now, not all of these are available in my area. That's why I don't know all of them. And then I think their more recent one is Total Wireless, also runs on the Verizon network. And then T-Mobile's got Metro PCS, Straight Talk. They've got like H2O Wireless. No, I think Republic Wireless might be a T-Mobile MVNO. And then there's like a Ting. TING. I've never heard of that, but apparently they've got an MVNO partnership with T-Mobile. So, and then Sprint obviously has got Boost Mobile, Virgin Mobile, Sprint Prepaid, and there are also a couple others. The MVNO partners was on AndroidGuys.com. They listed mostly the same bands. Android guys, I think, left out Band 5, and that's why I looked at Phone Arena too. I wanted to see how they differed, but they're pretty much the same. I think the reason AndroidGuys.com didn't include the 5, Band 5, because it's not available everywhere. Because I know AT&T doesn't have Band 5 in my area, so it's Band 2, 4, and 17. That's why I said it all depends on what area you're in and, what's available for purchase. So.
1,900 grams, 850, 2,500, cell, column 3.
So, then that just shows you that, I was right about the Sprint network. They primarily run on the 1900 megahertz PCS, but they do also have 850 megahertz LTE, 850 megahertz LTE, and they also have 2.5 gigahertz LTE. So, that's a little bit more about them. Again, I can try and see how I can hook you guys up with what spectrum and how much bandwidth of each band, LTE band, is available in your area. I can see what I can work out, but I will go ahead and link to this whole story, this whole article down below. If I find that other Android guys one again, I was able to find it once, and I couldn't figure out exactly what wording I used to get it, so I'll try and get that, and I'll post that in another link in the description down below, or in the comment section down below. I think that'll work better for you guys. So, I hope this kind of shed light on the different bands that each carrier has. Again, I know it's been a long video. I do apologize, but I hope you guys were able to learn a lot. This was so much to try and include in one video, so I do apologize. But please, guys, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share, subscribe. And this was Dusty with Blind-Droid Tech, and I'll see you guys in the next one. And if you guys have any other ideas about what apps you want me to use, I can try to do some of the social media for you guys, but I'm honestly, YouTube is my social media network at the moment. I can try and activate my Facebook again, but I'm big on privacy, which, is kind of funny because I shouldn't have a cell phone, but I just don't like being, that readily available on social media, so just anybody and their mother can search me out. That's just not who I am. But if you guys have any other ideas, if you blind people using iOS have any apps that you want to see if they're available on Android or how accessible they are on Android, I'd be more than happy to do those for you. So please leave your suggestions in the comments down below, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.